And you're ensuring effectiveness because we're ensuring that we are implementing the right thing. First and foremost, we need to be doing the right thing. So by you being on the business side and me on the IT side, working in collaboration, in close collaboration to build a target architecture, as we'll talk probably a bit later, we're going to be sure that the money that we invest to transform ourselves is going to be doing the right things. So that for me is very, very important.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. With continued market and competitive pressures impacting organizations today, companies are required to transform themselves to keep up with the pace of business and remain relevant. But many are still struggling despite various practices they've adopted in an effort to help them through these transitions. Today's guest, Pierre is the author of the book Business Architecture, the missing link in strategy formulation, implementation, and execution. He's a full professor at the School of Management at the Université du Québec à Montréal and co-founder of Asate Group, Inc., a management consultancy helping businesses transform effectively to become more innovative and competitive. Like my guest in the last episode, Pierre will be speaking at the Association for Strategic Planning's annual conference in Denver on May 17, 2019, on this topic. And today, he's here to talk about how to realize that organizational transformation through a business architecture approach, the blueprint, master schedule, and team to effectively guide you from strategy to execution. Pierre always had a passion for the business side of technology, as there was this foundational need to marry the theoretical perspective with the practical application. This drove his decision to minor in technology management while earning his bachelor's in electrical engineering and also choosing to spend time after school in the private sector. But the pace of the business environment showed him that it didn't always offer time for people to really think about what they were doing and why, with a level of rigor he thought was important. Because these actions all have implications. So he chose to go back to get his PhD in electrical engineering, technology, and management, and continued to stay in academia as a professor. And during that time, he was very focused on theory and research. But after some time, he felt his impact was not as substantial as it could be. He yearned to apply theory and research to practically help companies.
And I was getting a bit restless at that time. I said, you know what? It's interesting what I'm doing, but does it really help companies? Because again, as you know, Connie, I'm more on the business side. I teach in a business school. And I think that we have to connect what we do with the private sector. Mm-hmm. So 2010, basically, I said, you know what? I'm going to start working again with private companies. And at that time, one of my colleagues, which was very incisive, gave me a book, which is a book from MIT on enterprise architecture. So I read that book, and honestly, it changed everything because I said, you know what? This is exactly what I want to do. And by the way, I was already 38, so it took me a lot of time to find exactly what I wanted to do. So I read the book, and they talk about a way of aligning business to IT, which I really liked. Because I didn't mention it, but I'm a professor in MIS in a business school. So when I read about architecture, I said, you know what, this is really interesting because it pushes the envelope a level higher. So you can have a complete view of the firm and how IT can be leveraged to bring business value.
After getting a book on enterprise architecture, which proposed the practice from a business point of view and not a technical way like many, he was hooked. It gave him his path on what area he wanted to focus on. Pierre then had an opportunity to work with an enterprise architecture executive at one of the largest banks in Canada. It was there where he was able to start marrying the theoretical with the practical by identifying and understanding the major challenges the organization was having and realizing their strategic initiatives. Because for Pierre,
many people think practice and theory do not align, do not fit together. I completely disagree with that because I think that nothing is more practical than a good theory.
It was also at that time when Pierre met his co-author and co-founder of his consulting company.
And that's about at the same time that I met my co-author, which is Bernard Gagnon, with whom I wrote the book. And that at that time, it started in 2010, but in 2012, I really made a shift in my career. So number one, I met my co-author with whom I've been working for 7 years now. We had the idea about the book, which I think we'll talk about a bit later. So from that time on, I said, you know what? We're going to apply theory, but it has to be really practical and it has to bring real value to companies. And most, if not all of my research that I've been done since 2012 has been in this focus. And once we started writing the book, it was basically a book objective, to get the knowledge out. But right away, we started to get some calls from companies and from people who said, you know what, I like what you guys are doing. Could we take it a step further? So that's why I started and we co-founded Asate, Bernard and I. And basically, this is where we're at today.
For Pierre, solving business problems is about constantly looking for ways to improve. How do you take something and make it even better? But it's also understanding everything from end to end. From Pierre and Bernard's business strategy research and through their work with various companies via his business consultancy, Asate.
It means aligning strategy, architecture, transformation, and execution. Basically, the objective is we want to help firms transform themselves in an effective and agile manner.
They use the business architecture as one of the frameworks to help organizations address and break through those difficulties to achieve their strategic objectives. And through their experience, Pierre and his co-founder have discovered common challenges organizations have in the strategy formulation and implementation phase.
For me, most of the problems come from two things. The first is people think too much in the short term. Okay, I think you know that. Many companies are public, so they need to have good numbers every semester and so forth and so on. So that's one of the issues. But the second thing is, we always hear, Kanye, about the Plan, Do, Check, Act. Okay, well, I think people forgot about that. I don't know why. I think because the world is going so fast today, things are changing so fast. We want to be agile. We want to do as many things as we can, but sometimes we forget about the basic, which is Plan, Do, Check, Act. These two ways of thinking bring problems both in strategy formulation and in strategy implementation. Okay? So in strategy formulation, as I'm sure you're aware, many people do not know what a strategy is. Okay? There are many definitions of what a strategy is. The literature is very abundant, and some people say, well, it is red. Other people would say it is blue. No, some people say, no, it's green, and so forth and so on. So the literature there's not a clear definition of what strategy is. And I think this has a major impact in the private sector because the philosophy are different and aligning everybody to different concepts is very difficult. There's that, and there's another thing, which many companies do not have a strategy, or it's too implicit. It's not documented. It's not thought through. It's mostly, it emerges from the way they act, which for me is a problem because I think that the first thing you have to know is where you want to go before spending energy and money and investments into getting somewhere. You want to know where you're getting.
Not having a clear definition of a strategy certainly makes it hard to align everyone around the end goal. And with the strategy not completely thought through or documented, people in the organization won't know what to do or really what the North Star is. But there's another important consideration that isn't always taken into account in the strategy formulation phase. It's analyzing the feasibility of bringing that strategy to life.
One of the things that needs to be done in formulation is to assess whether what we're thinking is doable. Can we do it in a certain number of years? And do we have the money and the people to do it? Because many people think about strategy, they think they have a strategy, they start, and 2-3 years later, they realize, you know what? this was an elephant we couldn't chew. So that's another problem. So these two are the two, I would say, most easy to fix, which are in strategy formulation. And then we uncovered quite a few in the book that relate to implementation. Okay, so implementation for us is how do you transform the firm the firm so that your operations will be in alignment with what you decided you wanted in the strategy formulation. I think a big problem is the long-term financial plan and the budgets of companies are not aligned with the strategy. So basically, we are planning to transform ourselves, right, in formulation, and we start investing and so forth. But the way we want to transform ourselves is not aligned to our financial plan and the budgets that we need to be able to transform ourselves. So this is a big problem because many companies overestimate the benefits of transformation, and they think that these benefits will come earlier than they actually do. So basically what happens is they start an implementation. They think it's going to take 1 year, 2 years to get some benefits. And after 3, 4, they did not get any benefits. So what happens then? Well, morale gets down, so forth and so on. And very often when you can start to get the benefits, they stop the projects. So when finally we start going to reaping benefits, because we predicted they would happen earlier, they lose sight or they stop investing in the implementation, which is very bad because not only don't they realize what they were supposed to reap, but they spend a lot of money trying to do that.
When it comes to implementation, the short-term thinking versus long-term is a limiting factor in planning and operating against the desired future state. Pierre shares that another root problem when it comes to strategy implementation is related to how projects are chosen. They aren't rigorous enough from his point of view.
Then there's selecting the project. As I mentioned before, which projects do you want to do before? We always want to do projects that bring benefits as soon as possible, but sometimes it's better to do what we call foundation projects that will make it that, okay, we'll get some benefits a bit later, but we won't have to redo transformation and retransform the organization 2 or 3 times before being really effective. So that's another problem. Then, of course, as you know, there's leadership issues. Many leaders do not want to talk about IT. IT is taboo. And they are so busy running the business, getting money in the company, that it's very hard for them to have time to invest in the transformations. But for me, without the full support and involvement of the senior executives, for me, a transformation is never going to work. And the last one, which we call govern, is, as you know, everything changes. So how is it that we are so slow in adjusting the way we want to transform ourselves? We need to have mechanisms that while we're transforming ourselves, if something changes, whether it's in the company, whether a competitor does something different, that we can take this information and really be agile and refocus our energy on investment and adapt ourselves. And I think that we are lacking in that respect also.
Regardless of your company's size or industry, when it comes to understanding the macro issues and aligning that with all the necessary capabilities, processes, and technologies needed, there are going to be disconnects. And issues arise with the realization of a strategy when it doesn't account for these disconnects. You begin to create internal inertia as you attempt to move forward. So your intended organizational transformation, your business transformation, isn't achieved. So what else are companies doing wrong?
We don't plan, do, check, act, or we do it too fast. And how do we align the business with the IT? That's a big problem. We always think that the transformation of the firm is in the hands of IT people. Okay. Very often people on the business side said, you know what? I want this. Please give it to me so I can do what I want to do. But the reality is nobody knows better what you want to do than you. So you have to be involved in this transformation. So we have not only to involve IT people in transforming the firm and making the strategy a reality, but people on the business side have to get involved and work with them to decide how we are going to look like once we transform. That's another big problem.
Because, so is it almost, if I add, could you also think of it this way, where in working with the business side, they have a theoretical understanding of what it would take to implement the necessary IT transformation that would push their business forward, versus a practical understanding. So it's about marrying that theoretical with the practical from both the IT and business side.
Yes. And if you don't mind, it's very interesting what you're saying, because, okay, first of all, of course, people on the business side will have an idea, right? They say, okay, I want to be able to do this. Okay. But if you tell me, okay, let's say, Connie, you are on the business side and I'm on the IT side. It's very different if you tell me, Pierre, here's a drawing, please do it for me and come back and see me in a year. Okay. This is basically, I don't want to be too negative, but very often that's the way it works today. So number one, maybe you saw something in your picture that I did not. So might as well you help me, or you draw the picture and I help you draw it. And while I'm trying to implement what I'm doing in the drawing, I keep showing you, Connie, is it good? Am I in the right direction? So forth and so on. So this collaboration is essential, because what you think when you're building the drawing is not the same thing as the way I'm receiving it when I'm looking at it. And another problem is, very often people in IT, in business, they have great ideas. Let's say we should do this, we should do that. But the person in the IT side, with their knowledge of the technical side of the firm, maybe they could say, well, Connie, you know what? This is interesting, but how about we do it this way? So it's going to cost cheaper. It's going to be more effective. We're going to leverage other assets.
Breaking out of our functional silos is a challenge. Further, not tapping into other valuable resources who can offer the insightful solutions limits any strategic initiative's potential. So it becomes even more important to truly engage everyone as a way to minimize these disconnects.
So what I'm trying to say now, and I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly, is it's not you and then me. We have to work together. You have to be involved, but you take the lead in some parts. So the business architects and the people in the business side, they take a lead in some parts. And while you take the lead in some parts, I take the lead in other parts, but you always accompany me. So we're both moving in the same direction at the same time. And you're ensuring effectiveness, because we're ensuring that we are implementing the right thing. First and foremost, we need to be doing the right thing. So by you being on the business side and me on the IT side, working in collaboration, in close collaboration, to build a target architecture, as we'll talk probably a bit later, we're going to be sure that the money that we invest to transform ourselves is going to be doing the right things. So that for me is very, very important.
When it comes to successful execution, the key is ensuring there's representation from all parties involved. The stakeholders are aligned on what the strategy is from the beginning and are able to share information in an iterative process throughout the entire project. You're marrying the business side and the technology side and taking a we versus me mentality. So if creating this alignment across the business ecosystem is a critical component to driving their transformational initiatives forward, how does the business architecture approach provide the missing links? Based on the results of their in-depth examination of the 12 types of difficulties organizations face in their organizational transformations, 3 components make up their integrated framework.
3 things. Number 1 is what we call a target business architecture, not a target IT architecture, a target business architecture. The second is what we call the transformation plan. And the third thing is what we call the business architecture team. So these 3 elements or components are for us ways to alleviate the 12 issues that we mentioned before. So where do these 3 come from? When I'm asked the question, I always try to do a parallel with the construction. with the construction field. The method that we developed, we consider is a rigorous organizational transformation, strategic planning approach. Okay? And it's based in the construction field.
The business architecture approach can be summarized in this way based on Pierre's analogy to the construction field. 1, the target business architecture, think of that as an overall plan. If you think of constructing a bridge, it's a high-level drawing of what the bridge is going to look like. 2, the transformation plan, which is the master schedule.
And before they start deciding each of the project they're going to do to build the bridge, they have what's called a master schedule. So they have a big plan that says how they are going to build the bridge. Not one project, the whole shebang, saying, okay, for the next 4 years, we have to start by doing this, then doing that, then doing so forth, and so on.
And 3, the business architecture team. Think of it as a specialized engineering team that builds the bridge. They're there to help everyone involved across the various phases. And Pierre calls these business architects the catalysts of transformation because they have to ignite people in strategy to be sure that their strategy is feasible, help construct a concrete, actionable plan, and then guide those who will be responsible to fully execute the project. These business architects are roles in the firm that's involved from strategy to execution.
So you see, for us, every time we're doing a construction, there's always an overall plan, there's always a master schedule, there's always an engineering team. How is it that when we want to transform the firm, which is even more complex, more sophisticated than a bridge, that we do not have these 3 elements? So that's why they became the core of what we call the business architecture approach.
So these business architects or this business architecture team really is that bridge between the more business-focused side of the house and the engineering side, where then these people can understand what the strategy is intended to be, but also more importantly, how to fundamentally execute that such that it always aligns back to the strategy.
So, as you know, Connie, people do have a strategy or they try to have a strategy. Okay, but the problem is very often based on a 5 or 10-page document, which is supposed to be the strategy, they try to launch millions and millions of dollars of projects. Okay, so for us, the target business architecture will detail what's in the strategy. So the first input is the strategy. And with this strategy, you are going to define the target business architecture, not the target IT architecture, the business architecture, the processes you're going to need, the capability, the information, the know-how. How is it that I want to function? Once you have this picture, which is much more detailed than the strategy, you don't launch your project. This is too early. What do? You need a big plan, the master schedule, the transformation plan, who's going to say, okay, Connie, what do we want to do for the next 2-3 years? Before choosing the project that we want to do next, we need to know all of the transformations that we need to do for 2 or 3 years. This is the transformation plan. And then, being the architecture team, we were, as you mentioned a minute ago, we're involved in the strategy. We can get their inputs. We build these 2 plans, and then we guide all of the people that come after us. Basically, we work with project portfolio managers. We work with people in the project to be sure that what they actually execute is following the transformation plan, which is based on the target architecture, which in turn is aligned to the strategy.
So if I could say it also in another way, the very first part, which the target business architecture is this blueprint. So you're mapping out all of the functions, processes, units, assets, every element of the organization that could be impacted by a particular initiative, which then once that's mapped out, then you're developing, as you said, the transformation plan, which helps you determine how do you prioritize what will probably be the most effective route to achieve the fundamental goal that you're looking to target. And then once that prioritization has taken place, and that is that sort of foundational plan, as you said, or strategy, then you're going into thinking about implementation. Yes. So the business architecture practice, or that last piece, is about ensuring that you've got the right individuals and skills and so forth in place to bring this essentially to life.
Exactly. The only thing I would add, Connie, which I did not say, is we mentioned about the blueprint that you mentioned, right? But the blueprint has many facets, okay? So one of the facets is the one I focused on was the business architecture. But it's important that people understand that while we do this blueprint of the business, in parallel, we have some colleagues doing the IT and other technology blueprints, because all of these sub blueprints have to fit together to a one holistic and coherent blueprint. And the transformation plan that we mentioned, it's based on the complete blueprint, not just the business side, nor only the IT side. It's the blueprint of everything. And that's the challenge. Remember that we mentioned a couple of minutes ago?
Right.
We need both people to do the blueprint. It cannot only be IT and it cannot only be business. But today, it's very often that people do the IT blueprint, but the business blueprint, who's really aligned to the strategy, is lacking today.
Creating a business architecture, as Pierre framed it, is like creating a construction blueprint. And to execute it, you need three things: a documented strategy or architecture plan, a plan for how you're going to execute it, or the transformation plan, and then a set of people who will be assets in moving the initiative forward, the architecture team. And as Pierre will share, it is an integrated effort where planning and executing happen in parallel.
People have to understand that all of these things are done simultaneously, but you do one part of the firm at a time. So you may be doing the architecture of a part of a firm, but while you're doing this architecture, you're implementing another part of the organization. So all of this has to be aligned, and all of this has to be running at the same time. So that's very, very, very important, because if not, it's not going to work. Okay?
It's pretty complex.
Yeah, it is complex. And that's why the role of the business architecture team is fundamental, because they can have some inputs. Of course, it's not the same, but in each of these phases, because, in strategy, we mentioned that we can help in the feasibility analysis. So we can help strategists clarify their strategy. We can help them document it and so forth. In implementation, well, we mentioned we can build a target business architecture. We can build a transformation plan in collaboration with stakeholders throughout the firm. And then we can guide the people, as you mentioned before, that do the project and the resources that really will require a lot of investment to transfer the firm. But if we do not have these activities that are integrated, and if we do not have the architects, the business architects who are there from the beginning till the end, it's never going to work. So that's the difficulty of the issue, is because to simplify the firm, to simplify the way we transform the firm, we need rigor with the three components that I mentioned, and we need a team that's transverse. From strategy, that's involved from strategy to the implementation. One of the things that we often do, and that we're often asked to do, is to do what's called the business assessment. I'm sure you know what's a business assessment. Mm-hmm. Get in, we're trying to find what's wrong, and we're trying to find rapidly the main issues that have to be solved. This is one of the things that many companies like, because we can help them find the issues and start building this blueprint that you mentioned, so that eventually they can do the implementation on their own time and once they have the budget and so forth. So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing that we did with the company was, it was a company that focused a lot on its processes. But the problem the company had was they kept thinking about, as you mentioned before, processes in silos. So they said, okay, well, division has to optimize this way, division 2 this way, and so forth. So when we were approached, we told them, you know what? We have to take a step back. Let's look at all of these processes in a holistic way, and let's do a blueprint of how all of these processes have to be mashed together to actually reap all of the benefits. And we call this the target business process architecture, or macro processes. We call these macro processes because business architects' job are not to go into the details of each product, its process. It's to map how everything is going to fit together in such a way that everything is connected and you will not lose information, and you will be able to combine information from different companies so you don't have silos.
Pierre spends a lot of his time training others on how to adopt the business architecture approach. Really, it's helping technically oriented individuals understand this multidisciplinary view of their organization, helping them view things from both the technical and business lens in order to effectively create and implement a blueprint. But it's not always easy to adopt this mindset right away. Along with the misconceptions that these organizational transformations are primarily the responsibility of the IT team, there are a couple of others that Pierre mentioned.
Another misconception that I keep hearing and seeing is reorgs. They keep doing reorg. A lot of reorganization. Okay, this is not working. We're going to reorg. We're going to move Connie from this department and so forth. But thinking this way is as if you're thinking that the company is mostly built on org units, because the org units is one of the building blocks. But as I mentioned before, the business architecture has other building blocks, the processes, capabilities, information, know-how, and so forth. So do not focus on one and only one building block to fix your problems. You have to master all of them. And this is documented in our book. And the last one, which I'm just going to mention, but I do not know exactly how to fix it because this is not my field, I think is the way bonuses are attributed in companies. Because very often you will get your bonus if you do X number of sales, if you do X, Y, Z. We need to find new way of motivating, whether financially or creatively wise, people that will force, or I wouldn't say force, but that would incite people to work together more. Because a business transformation is not going to work if everybody has his own bonuses and objectives. Of course, you need your own, but you need to tie these to those of your colleagues and so forth. We have to find a new way.
Combining rigor and agility in the formulation and execution of the strategic plan leads to successful transformation. And that is what Pierre is passionate about in helping organizations achieve their goals. And he's got some reminders that we should always be thinking about.
So, number one, plan, do, check, act. Please do not act before planning. And when you act, be sure to have what I call a strategy management system. Bernard and I, we call this a strategy management system. You need a system not only to plan, but to check what you did to be sure that, well, maybe I should change this and so forth and so on. And I always say effectiveness before agility and efficiency. Agility is great. Efficiency is perfect, but it's not worth anything if you don't have effectiveness, if you're not doing the right thing. Then prioritize. Of course, you need to have short-term benefits, but prioritize the long-term over the short-term. It doesn't mean you do not have short-term planning, but prioritize the long-term because a transformation takes many years. Fourth, think holistically. Okay? You will not be able to transform the firm if you do not think or see the company as a whole, and not only as a whole of divisions, but as a whole from strategy formulation to implementation to execution. All of these things has to be tied together. It is complicated, but it's by addressing this complexity that you will be able to simplify the functioning of the firm. And another one that we mentioned briefly is engage. How do you engage all of these people to do that? And very often when we do the training that I mentioned to you before, Connie, people say, you know what, I'm an architect. I love doing the plans, right? I like to do the blueprint. Okay, you're telling us to do a transformation plan. That's interesting. But Pierre, why do you and Bernard insist so much on the engage? Well, because we have to sell our idea. You remember the book, To Sell is Human? From Pierre? everything we do, we have to sell it. Nobody can sell the idea of a transformation better than a business architect, because we know the whole story. We have to motivate people. We have to get them involved. We do not do it alone. We need specialists in change management, but we have to get people engaged in the transformation. That's a big issue. It's not true that by hiring change management people, you will fix your change management issues. Even Cutter wrote it in 1996. You need a big coalition. Everybody, you have to be involved. I have to be involved. In addition to be experts in our field, we have to be expert at engaging people in the transformation. An architect cannot do it alone. A strategist, even with the best strategy, cannot do it alone. A project portfolio manager cannot do it alone. We all have to work together toward the same goals, which is formulate, implement, and update a strategy that's going to help us be competitive.
So what I take away from that is that it's obviously not just having this blueprint and then ultimately this plan, but it is all about the people and ensuring that you can get the necessary engagement, as you called it, and motivate the people in the right way. But those people also have to have the right mindset. And it's that mindset and openness to change and trying something new that is critical to the success of any transformation.
Yes. And we cannot underestimate the importance of the business side in the transformation.
And to close, what advice would you give your younger self?
It took me many years to find the exact thing that I really, really wanted to do. Okay. So the first thing I suggest is think long-term. Okay. It's not true that if you study in a field and so forth, whether at 18, 19, 20, or even 25, that you'll be doing the same thing when you're 50 or 60. You have to think long-term. But knowledge compounds. As Warren Buffett says, knowledge compounds. So it's important that as you evolve and you keep learning and trying new things, you try to learn things that are going to complement the things that you learned before. Because if you start learning things in field X and then in field Y and there's no connection between the two, that I don't think is going to be effective. So you have to have a circle of competence, which they always say in finance, but you also need to be a generalist and be able to talk to the people around you and have a better idea of how you can help them and how they can help you achieve your work. Another thing I always tell my students is choose the people you want to work with, not the companies. Okay. Of course, it would be great that you work for a very famous company and so forth and so on, but you work with people. And it is these people who are going to help you to go forward in your career. So in my life, I always focused on the people before the companies. And usually, or very often, there are very good people in very good companies, but always focus on the people.
Great. And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Well, one of the ways, as I hinted before, is to go on our website, which is asategroup.com, asategroup.com. Another one, of course, people can reach out to me at the university. They can just write my name in Google. They'll find my name and my email. It's very easy. Or even connect with me via LinkedIn.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and appreciate all of the valuable insight and perspective on your business architecture approach.
Well, thank you. And I thank you for this opportunity. I was honored to be a part of this.
The business architecture approach is about creating greater fidelity around how to effectively formulate and, more importantly, realize an organization's business strategy. By understanding all the critical dependencies across a company's ecosystem, you can then create the necessary blueprint, detailed master schedule, and team that can help bring this all to life. And to adopt this business architecture mindset takes the crossover of the technology and business sides, creating a common ground where everyone can work together towards the same goals. Because at the end of the day, forward momentum depends on not only identifying those missing links, but creating the necessary connections to drive that alignment. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Pierre through his website, asategroup.com, ASATEGROUP.com, or by searching Pierre Hadaya, that's PIERREHADAYA. To learn more or to register for the Association for Strategic Planning's annual conference, visit www.strategyassociation.org or follow the link in the show notes for this episode at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. At the conference, Pierre will be presenting a session titled The Business Architecture Approach to Formulate and Implement a Strategy that Leverages the Business Ecosystem at 1:45 p.m. on May 17th. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a review. To hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. And don't forget to follow Strategic Momentum on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.